I know this is a difficult but important conversation, and I'd like to apologize to you for any distress that being here may cause you. And before we get going with the conversation, I'd like to introduce the two narrators in my exhibit, both survivors of the 1984 violence. On your screen is Mr. Kirpal Singh, who's joining us from Tilak Vihar, New Delhi, which is often referred to as the Widows Colony. Kirpal was my first, narrator when I started conducting the oral history interviews. He works in Delhi for a Sikh Affairs institution, and he had lost his father to the violence. And he is the son of Mrs. Preetam Kaur, who's featured on the exhibit that you have probably seen. And we are going to visit the exhibit together in a bit. My second narrator is Prithpal Singh, whom you also see here. Prithpal is a pharmacist in North Delhi, whose pharmacy was ransacked and looted and partially burnt. But he decided to dig in his heels and restart the operation after a few months at the same place. And he continues to be there. So that requires a lot of courage to not move away, not get covered by stuff that happened. And the special thing about his presence is that, he tested positive for COVID, and he's running mild fever, and yet he's thought this is important enough for him to be coming in, and sharing his thoughts. So I'm particularly grateful that in spite of his illness, he has joined from Delhi. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Amy Sterczewski, my program director, and my thesis supervisor, who has changed my life. And this dream of mine that I had, I'm able to realize because of her guidance. Also, Professor William McLester, and another professor of mine, Carlin Zia, is also here. So I'm grateful, and all of you, Susan, Serge, Belinda, my nephew, Sarabjit, who's a professor. I can see other family members. There is, the Al Jazeera program editor, Gurpreet Singh, who's joining from Doha, Qatar. Holly is here, Elizabeth, Harleen, Dharini, who's a new student, Nina. Thank you so much. Lisa is also here, so thank you. I'd like to share my screen with you and briefly take you through the exhibit that I've created. So this is the home page. It has the photographs of 4 ladies who unfortunately lost their husbands at different points of time, and all 4 of them lost their husbands. That is the lead photograph, and then there's an introduction, and I'm explaining why I'm calling it the Victims of November, because the incidents that occurred started with the assassination of India's then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, on 31st October 1984, and the violence began effectively from the morning of the 1st of November, so hence that name. On the home page, if you scroll down, you will find this sound walk, which is my narration in the audio form over photographs. Considering I was also um, a survivor and had to be rescued from where we lived in North Delhi to a refugee camp. And this sound walk retraces that journey from that home to the police station, and from the police station through parts of North Delhi into Ludlow Castle camp. And this is the the photograph that you see on your screen is that same school which was turned into a makeshift refugee camp at that time. And this is where we lived, along with my family. Then you have these 6 windows, and these are the testimonies to trauma. There is Mrs. Preetham Kaur, whose son I just introduced to you, Kirpal Singh. There is Maya Kaur, there is Mrs. Popri Kaur, there is Mrs. Gopi Kaur, and Mr. Trilochan Singh, and Prithpal Singh. Prithpal Singh is also here. It would be important to mention that Mr. Trilochan Singh was the press secretary to the President of India at that time, and even he was not spared. And somebody threw a burning stick into his car, and his driver had the presence of mind to fling it out, and that is how he survived. He has sat down with me, and there's a detailed oral history interview that we have done, for which he's given me his consent. But for the excerpt, I played it back to him, and I'm still waiting for his sign off, which is why you don't find his interview yet, and you don't find the transcript yet, but it'll be there, I think, in the next day or so. Over the weekend, I think we scheduled a conversation. Below, when you open, for example, let's open Prithpal Kaur's individual page, and you find that there are 4 small boxes here. One is called migration map. One is the oral history interview audio excerpt. There's a video excerpt, since I've done all the interviews in the video format, but audio has also been made available. And then there's a transcript for those who can't access audio or video for any reason. Now, this migration map essentially is a Google Earth device that I used, and it essentially tracks the journey of each narrator from where they were and how they moved from one place to the next. Essentially, the map is meant to record the displacement that they faced. So, for example, Mr. Kirpal Singh's mother lived in Sultanpuri, and from Sultanpuri, she, after the violence, moved to the Piragadi camp in West Delhi. And from the camp, she went to her brother's house in Raghubir Nagar. And then from there, she moved to Islamganj in Ludhiana in the state of Punjab, some 150 miles away. And then came back to where she presently lives in Tilak Vihar, which is where most of the women who had lost their husbands or fathers were relocated. At the bottom of this page, you will also find a link to the background and context. So it is accessible to those who may not know the sequence of events and in what context this violence occurred. Then there's a timeline and a bibliography. And then there are the usual avenues for contact information and about me as the curator for this. And there's a feedback avenue where I'm actually asking a question about where you were when Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated. This would be particularly relevant to folks back home in India. And it would be, it would start a conversation because people would be able to plumb their memory and recall what exactly happened back in the day and where they were and how they've transitioned through their lives over the last 36 and a half years now. So I want to basically bring Kirpal Singh into this conversation and ask him, what is it that is hurting the narrators the most, which is the crux of today's discussion. And I will do that. I think I'll ask that question in Punjabi and he will answer in Punjabi and then I'll translate it for you. So, Kirpal, मेरी आवाज आ रही है तुहानू? अनम्यूट करो अपने आप नु प्लीज.
ठीक है जी.
मेरी आवाज आ रही है किरपाल?
हाँ जी आ रही है.
किरपाल, मैं तुहानू करीब 20-25 साल ते हो गए मैनू तुहानू जानदे होए, मे भी ज्यादा.
हाँ जी.
ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜ਼ੂਮ ਰੂਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੋਕ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲੋਂ ਫਸਟ ਹੈਂਡ ਜਾਨਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਰਵਾਈਵਰਸ ਹੈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਯੂ ਬਿਲੋਂਗ ਟੂ ਦੀ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਆਫ ਅ ਵਿਕਟਿਮ.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਦੇ ਕੀ ਹੈਗਾ? ਕਿ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲਿਆ ਉਹ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਦੇ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਧਿਆਨ ਦੇਣਾ ਛੋੜ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਦੇ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਕੁਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਦੇ ਹੈ? ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਦੇ ਕੀ ਹੈਗਾ?
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਆਲ ਓਵਰ ਯੂ. ਮੈਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਬੋਲਾਂਗਾ.
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ.
ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ. ਜਿਵੇਂ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ 1984 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕੀ ਮਾਇਨੇ ਰੱਖਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨਿਆਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਅਣਗੌਲਿਆ ਕਰਤਾ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹਦੇ ਕੋਈ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਰਾਹਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲੀ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤੀ. ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਅਗਰ ਜੇਕਰ ਕੋਈ ਕਮੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਦੀ. 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਦੇ ਲਈ अगर कुछ कमी रह गई है तो वो सिर्फ कानून व्यवस्था दी न्याय मिलन दी. और ये जेड़ा 1984 कतलेआम होया ये कोई छोटी गल नहीं सी. इंडिया विच नहीं पूरे संसार भर विच इसदी चर्चा हुई. संसार भर दे विच वर्ल्ड विच इस दे बारे 84 राइट्स बारे सारिਆਂ ਨੂੰ पूरे संसार ਨੂੰ पता लग गया. लेकिन इंडिया ਇਹਨੂੰ जस्टिफाई नहीं कर सके. जस्टिफाई मीन्स कि इन्हां दे जो मेन मुख जो स्टार्टिंग करवाउण वाले जां जो इस सारे कांड ਨੂੰ ਕਰਨ वाले सी दोषी मेन जो लीड कर रहे सी ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਸਟੀਫਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਿਆ ਜਦਕਿ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਮ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ. ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ, ਕੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ, ਜਸਟਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ, ਆਲ ਓਵਰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਹਜ਼ਾਰਾਂ ਧਰਨੇ ਹੋਏ। ਹਰ ਸਾਲ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਆਂਦਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਵਿਡੋਜ਼ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਧਰਨਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਨਾਰਾ ਲਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਦਿਓ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਦੋਸ਼ੀ ਨੇ। 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਦੇ ਵਿਕਟਿਮਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹਰ ਸਾਲ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਆਂਦਾ ਹੈ, 1984 ਦਾ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਮਹੀਨਾ ਆਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਯਾਦ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਹਰ ਸਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਅਸੀਂ ਧਰਨੇ ਵੀ ਦਿੰਦੇ। ਅਸੀਂ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਜਗਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਇੰਨੇ ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ, 30 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ, 32 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ, 35 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ, ਉਸ 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਸਟੀਫਾਈ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਪਾ ਰਹੇ? ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗਿਲਟੀ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੋਸ਼ੀ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇ ਪਾ? ਇਹ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡਾ, ਅਗਰ 84 ਰਾਈਟ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਅਗਰ ਕੋਈ ਸਾਡੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਦੁਖਦਾਈ ਹੈਗਾ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਦੇ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਉਸ 84 ਰਾਈਟ ਨੂੰ ਜੋ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ, ਜੋ ਮੇਨ ਸੀ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਰਟ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਜਸਟੀਫਾਈ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇ ਸਕਦੀ? ਰੋਟੀ ਤੇ ਹਰ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਖਾ ਲੈਂਦਾ, ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਬਚਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਖਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਇੱਕ ਜੋ ਐਸੀ ਘਟਨਾ ਘਟ ਗਈ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕੋਰਟ ਜਾਂ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਜਾਂ ਦੇਸ਼ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇ ਸਕਦਾ? ਔਰ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਇੱਕ ਤੇ ਹੈਗਾ ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕਿਹਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਦੇਣੀ, ਨਹੀਂ, ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਪਤਾ, ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਦੇਸ਼ ਇੱਕ ਮਿਨੋਰਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਜਸਟੀਫਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਪਾਇਆ। ਐਸੇ 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਅਨੇਕਾਂ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਇੰਡੀਆ 'ਚ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ, ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜਲਦ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਆ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਨੇ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਇੱਕ 1984 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਹੀ ਐਸਾ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਜੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਔਰ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦਾ ਜੁਡੀਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਨਿਆਂ ਉਹ ਇਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ। ਉਹਦਾ ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਇਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਕੁਝ 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਤੇ 14, 15, 20 ਸਾਲ ਤੱਕ ਤੇ ਜਿਸ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਨੇ ਇਹ 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਕਰਵਾਏ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਹੀ ਉਸਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਾਬਿਜ਼ ਸੀ, ਜਿਸਨੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਮਤਲਬ ਜਸਟੀਫਾਈ ਹੋਣ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੇਨ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਇਸ ਲੀਡਰਸ ਇਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਨਵੋਲਵ ਸੀ। ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡਾ ਅਗਰ 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਗਰ ਅੱਜ ਦੁੱਖ ਵਾਲਾ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਖਰੀ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਾਂਗੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਛਾ ਹੈ ਵਿਕਟਿਮ ਦੀ, ਤਾਂ ਇਹੋ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹਦਾ ਜਸਟੀਫਾਈ, ਉਹਦੇ ਨਿਆਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਹੋਰ ਕੁਝ ਨਹੀਂ।
So let me translate what Kirpal is saying. He is essentially saying, out of all the options that he was presented with, in terms of what is hurting the survivors the most, he says lack of justice, lack of punishment to the perpetrators, the culprits, is what is hurting the survivors the most. And he's saying his understanding is that everybody knew, the ruling party knew, the courts knew, the judges knew, everybody understood what exactly had happened, who had done it. But because after that episode, for a long time, a decade and a half at least, the same ruling dispensation and the same leaders were in power, they ensured that the entire process of identifying the perpetrators was scuttled, and then justice could never be served. The other thing he's saying, which is important, is that in terms of support, he says everybody is eating food and surviving, but that's not enough. It rankles that we continue to be, every year, the month of October comes, the month of November comes, the first week comes, they all go out and protest. All the widows have sit-ins, and they keep raising the issue peacefully, but nobody pays any attention. So let me ask my second narrator, Prithpal Singh, what is his sense of what is hurting the narrators the most, or the survivors the most? Pritpal.
Hello, everybody. The main thing which is hurting us is that the whole attack, the whole thing was planned by the ruling party, and the minorities were attacked. And after that, the next thing which hurts most is the, as Kirpal said, is the no justice was given to us. All proofs were there. So many affidavits were given by the victims, the survivors, the families, but we haven't got any justice till almost 37 years. Judiciary, they keep on lingering the issues, but the main reason is again the same, because for a long period of time the same ruling party was there, and they were avoiding all these circumstantial evidences, and they destroyed these some evidences also. That's why we are not got the justice. Everybody with the time, again they stood up, they could re-establish their business establishments, but the lives which were lost, they couldn't come back. And the only thing which hurts is that we couldn't get any justice. That's it.
I'm going to share my screen once again and play a short clip from one of the interviews that'll give you a sense of hurt the survivors, particularly the widows, face. It's difficult if you feel you're not up to listening to it or watching it. Please feel free to mute yourself. But it is important to at least play an excerpt to give you a sense of what they have gone through or what they're still going through. So here.
सवेरे उठे तो चाय पानी हाली पीती सी, तो इन्ने विच जाके कहंदा देख के आना अगे बड़ा हल्ला हल्ला हो रहा है, लोग बड़े इकट्ठे हो रहे नहीं, पता करके आना की गल है की नहीं है। जिस तरह पता करनगे, मैं छोटी जी कुड़ी सी मेरे 8 महीने दी, ओदे में कपड़े उतार के एक कोई बनियान रह गई सी, ओदे उतारन वास्ते नवाण वास्ते लगी सी ओनू, तो इन्ने विच इधरों देखदियां तो लोकी मशाला लेके दौड़े दौड़े आ रहे, मारो सरदारा नू मारो, तो इस पासे जिस पासे ए गए सी उधरों ए दौड़े आ रहे। मैनू जिस तरह मैं बैठी सी बिना चुन्नी दे, सर्दी दा टाइम सी, ठंड सी हल्की हल्की, तो मैंने मैनू फड़िया जिस तरह बाजू विच, तो मैनू कहंदा दौड़ दौड़, लोकी आ गए तेनू मारन आ गए, सानू लोकी मार रहे नहीं। मैं क्यों लोकी मार रहे, असी की कीता है? मैं 2 मिनट रुको तो सही, मैं कुड़ी नू कपड़े तो पा लवां। मैं छड्ड कपड़े अपने नू, मैनू खिच के मैनू अपने मामे दे घर जाके उत्थे छुपा दिता। साडी झुग्गी सी, साडा रूम नहीं सी, झुग्गी सी, कहंदे अग ला देणगे तो असी मर जावांगे सारे, असी कित्थे चल के छुपीए, तो असी उत्थे जाके छुप गए। सवेरे मेरा जो सोहरा सी वो सवेरे निकल जांदा सी काम ते, वो खटां दा काम करदे, चारपाइयां दा, वो चारपाइयां दा काम करदे सी, वो सवेरे सवेरे निकल गए सी। सानू की पता सी भाई इहो जी भाई लड़ाई हो जाएगी, तो असी ओनू नहीं जान देंदे। उस तो बाद असी सारे जिस तरह कोई किधर रहिंदी, असी दौड़ दौड़ के छुप छुप के अपना छुपाया, अपने आप नू बचाया। थोड़ी देर ही नहीं हुई तो उत्थे ही मेरी मामे ससुर दे करी मेरी सस भी आ गई, तीनों मेरे देवर भी आ गए, तो असी उत्थे बैठे रहे। 12-1 बजे दा टाइम हो गया। करदे करदे लड़ाई शुरू जो हुई तो वधदी चली गई, घटन दा कोई नाम ही नहीं लिया, वधदी चली गई। शाम होए 4-5 बजे दा टाइम होया 1 तारीख नू, तो इन्ने विच मेरा सोहरा ओदे पूरे कपड़े फाड़ दिते, सिर्फ ओने अपनी पगड़ी नू जरा जी नू फाड़ बच गई सी, जो ओने अपने इत्थे लपेट लिती, ਤੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਮਾਰਿਆ, ਤੋ ਉਹਦੇ ਖੂਨ ਸਾਰਾ ਮੂੰਹ ਤੇ ਸਾਰਾ ਡੁੱਲਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ। ਤੋ ਇੰਜ ਹੱਲਾ ਮਚਾਦਾ ਵਜਾਦਾ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ, ਭਗਵਾਨ ਦਾ ਵਾਸਤਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਖਸ਼ ਦੋ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਖਸ਼ ਦੋ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਰਹਿਮ ਕਰੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਉੱਤੇ। ਇੰਜ ਕਰਦਾ ਕਰਦਿਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਵੱਲ ਹੀ ਆ ਗਿਆ, ਉਹੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਵੱਲ ਆ ਗਿਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਬੜੇ ਰੋਏ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਖ ਕੇ, ਭਈ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਪਾਪਾ ਨੂੰ, ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਲੈ ਜਾਈਏ, ਸਭ ਕੋਈ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਕੋਈ ਸਾਧਨ ਵੀ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਲੈ ਜਾਈਏ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੱਟੀ ਪੁੱਟੀ ਬੰਦ ਕੇ ਚੁੰਨੀ ਦੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਖੂਨ ਰੋਕ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਕੁਛ ਸੁਰਮਾ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਿਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਤਾਂ ਘਰਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਮਾਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡਾ, ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਬਚਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਮਾਰ ਦੇਣਗੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ। ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ, ਸਾਡੇ ਕਮਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਟਾਣ ਬਣੀ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਸਮਾਨ ਰੱਖਣ ਦੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਮਾਮਾ ਸਹੁਰੇ ਨੂੰ, ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੂੰ, ਮੇਰੇ ਸਹੁਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਉੱਪਰ ਚੜਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਬਹਿ ਜਾਓ। ਸਮਾਨ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਛੁਪਾ ਲਿਆ, ਤਾਂ ਅੱਗੇ ਸਮਾਨ ਰੱਖ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਛੁਪੇ ਰਹੋ ਇੱਥੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਜਨਾਨੀਆਂ ਥੱਲੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਰਵਾਂਗੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਛੁਪ ਜਾਓ। ਉਹ ਦੇਵਰ ਜੋ ਸੀ ਛੋਟੇ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਚੋਟੀ ਬਣਾ ਦਿੱਤੀ, ਫਿਰੋਕਾਂ ਪਾ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫਿਰੋਕਾਂ ਪਾ ਲਓ, ਮੁੰਡੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗੋਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਾਰਨਗੇ, ਫਿਰ ਤੇਰੇ ਮਾਰ ਦੇਣਗੇ। ਤੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਦੇ ਕਰਦੇ, ਫਿਰ ਇੰਨੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਲੇਡੀ ਨੂੰ ਚੁੱਕ ਕੇ ਲੈ ਗਏ ਬਾਹਰ, ਉਹਦਾ ਬਲਾਤਕਾਰ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ। ਫਿਰ ਉਹਦਾ ਬਲਾਤਕਾਰ ਕਰਨ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਫਿਰ ਕੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਹੋਰ ਫਿਰ ਚੱਲ ਪਿਆ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿਤੇ ਤੋਂ ਮਾਰਦੇ ਪਏ ਸੀ, ਕਿਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਜਨਾਨੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਬਲਾਤਕਾਰ ਵੀ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗੇ, ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗੇ। ਭਈ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਿਸ ਪਾਸੇ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਚਾਅ ਹੋਇਆ ਸਾਡਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਨੂੰ ਕੁੜੀ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਇੰਜ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਜਾਈਏ। 3 ਤਾਰੀਖ ਹੋ ਗਈ, 3 ਤਾਰੀਖ ਸਵੇਰਾ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਸ਼ੁਕਰ ਹੈ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ 3 ਬੰਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਬੱਚੇ ਪਏ ਨਹੀਂ। ਤੋ ਇੰਨੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਏ ਗਲੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਬੈਠੀ ਹੋ। ਤੋ ਮੇਰੀ ਸੱਸ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਹੁਣ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਹੱਲਾ ਮਚਦਾ ਪਿਆ ਹੈ। ਉਹਨੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਰੋਟੀ ਬਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਿੰਡਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਤਿਲੋਕਪੁਰੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੁੱਲ੍ਹੇ ਤੇ ਰੋਟੀ ਬਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀ, ਉਹਦੇ ਚੂਲੇ ਦੇ ਹੱਥ ਤਵੇ ਤੇ ਹੱਥ ਮਾਰ ਕੇ ਮੇਰੀ ਸੱਸ ਨੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਮੂੰਹ ਪੂਰਾ ਕਾਲਾ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ। तो मेरे वाल वूल खोल के दिखार दिते कि भाई इन साडी बच्चे भी साडे बच्चे पे ने, साडी इज्जत भी बच जाएगी, नहीं तो ये तो बड़ा ही बुरा करते पे ने कि साडे नाल भी कोई इहो जिहा बाणा ना वरत जाए। तो इंज करके मेरी सस कहंदी है, मेरी मामी सस भी, साडे इत्थे कोई नहीं हैगा, साडे निक्के निक्के बच्चे हैगे, असीं कित्थे जाइए लेके, असीं बैठे हां, साडे मुंडे तुसीं साडे मार दिते, साडा आदमी मार दिता, साडे हुण कोई भी नहीं बचिया है। हुण गुरु दा वास्ता है ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬੈਠਣ ਤੋਂ ਦੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਵਿੱਚ, ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਬੈਠ ਜਾਓਗੇ ਇੱਥੇ। ਗਾਲਾਂ ਕੱਢਣ ਲੱਗੇ ਗੰਦੀਆਂ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਗਾਲਾਂ। ਤੋਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ, ਇੱਕ ਫਿਰ ਵਾਪਸ ਚਲੇ ਗਏ। ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਚਲੋ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਇੰਨੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਭਾਈ ਸੀ, ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਯਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੈਠ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ, ਕੁਛ ਹੋਏਗਾ ਇੱਥੇ, ਗੜਬੜ ਹੈਗੀ ਕੁਛ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖੋ ਤਾਂ ਸਹੀ, ਤਲਾਸ਼ੀ ਤੋਂ ਲੋ ਮਕਾਨ ਦੀ। ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਤਲਾਸ਼ੀ ਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਲਿਆ, ਸਟੂਲ ਪਿਆ ਸੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਚੁੱਕ ਕੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਪਰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਜੋ ਇੰਜ ਚੁੱਕਿਆ ਤੋਂ ਦਿਖ ਗਏ। मेरा सोहरा लंबा सी, मेरा सोहरा दिख गया। जिस तरह मेरा सोहरा दिख गया, मेरे सोहरे नु जो फड़ के वाला विच तो दे गया थले, मेरा सोहरा चिक्का मारन लग गया। फिर मेरा सोहरे नु बाहर ले गए, नाला जैसी छोटा जा नाली होंदी जो ओदे एक सिल्ली रखी हुई सी दरवाजे तो अंदर आण दाण दी, ओदे सिल्ली विच ही वड़ गया मेरा सोहरा। ओ मेरे सोहरे नु ओ डंडिया नाल ਇੱਟਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਸਹੁਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਨਾਲੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਮਾਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਫਿਰ ਬਚ ਗਿਆ ਮੇਰਾ ਘਰ ਵਾਲਾ। ਫਿਰ ਮੇਰੇ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੂੰ ਉਤਾਰਿਆ, ਮਾਮੇ ਸਹੁਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਉਤਾਰਿਆ, ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ 2 ਡੰਡੇ ਮਾਰੇ। ਗੱਡੀ ਖੜੀ ਸੀ, 3 ਵੀਲਰ ਦਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੈਟਰੋਲ ਕੱਢਿਆ, ਉਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਮੇਰਾ ਘਰ ਵਾਲਾ ਹੱਥ ਜੋੜਨ ਲੱਗਿਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਮਾਰ ਦੇਣਾ, ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ 2 ਮਿੰਟ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੇ ਦੋ, ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚੀ ਨਾਲ ਮਿਲ ਲਵਾਂ, 2 ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਲਵਾਂ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਮਾਰ ਦੇਣਾ, ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਮਾਰ ਦੇਣਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ। ਉਹ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਮੰਨਦਾ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਫਿਰ ਮੇਰੇ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੂੰ ਡੰਡਾ ਮਾਰਿਆ, 2 ਮਿੰਟ ਥੱਲੇ ਡਿੱਗ ਪਿਆ। ਡਿੱਗਦਾ ਵੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਹਿ, ਤੈਨੂੰ ਮੇਰੀ ਕਸਮ ਹੈਗੀ, ਤੂੰ ਦੌੜ ਜਾ ਇੱਧਰੋਂ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਮਾਰ ਹੀ ਦੇਣੀ, ਤੇਰੀ ਵੀ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਖਰਾਬ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਤੂੰ ਦੌੜ ਜਾ, ਕੁੜੀ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਮੇਰੀ ਕੁੜੀ ਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਰੱਖਣਾ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਜਾ, ਦੌੜ ਜਾ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ। ਫਿਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਧਰੋਂ ਕੱਢ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਇੱਧਰੋਂ ਨਿਕਲੋ। ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਧਰੋਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਗਏ। ਫਿਰ ਤਿੰਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਫਿਰ ਮੇਰੇ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੂੰ, ਅਸੀਂ ਬੜੀ ਲੰਬੀ ਗਲੀ ਸੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ, ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੂੰ ਤੇਲ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਸਾੜ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਅੱਗੇ ਚਲੀ ਤਾਂ ਮੇਰਾ ਭਰਾ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਚਾਚੇ ਦਾ ਮੁੰਡਾ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਾੜ ਰੱਖਿਆ। ਉਹ ਜਲ ਕੇ ਇੰਨਾ ਫੁੱਲ ਗਿਆ, ਉਹ ਇੰਨੀ ਪੈਰ ਰਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਰੱਖਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਵੀ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੈਰ ਰੱਖੇ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਜਾਈਏ। ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੈਰ ਰੱਖੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਲਾਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਢੇਰ ਲੱਗੇ ਪਏ ਸੀ। ਕਿਤੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਭਰਾ ਜਲ ਰਹੇ, 3-4 ਭਰਾ ਸੀ ਮੇਰੇ, ਸਾਰੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਮਾਰ ਕੇ ਸੁਥਲਾ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਸੀ। ਮੇਰੇ ਚਾਚੇ ਨੂੰ, ਚਾਚੇ ਦੇ ਮੁੰਡਾ ਸੀ ਉਹਦਾ, ਉਹਨੂੰ, ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਸੀ, ਸਾਡਾ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਸਾਡਾ ਮਾਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਪੂਰਾ।
Naveen, it is difficult to watch this. It's heartbreaking. What is your sense when you see these testimonies? What is it that we haven't done, that we should have done to, comfort the survivors?
Actually, I think, let me just introduce myself. I'm a friend of Harpal's from India. I'm a journalist. I've also covered all this and been through all this. It's very difficult to actually, see all this and meet these people and see how much pain they've gone through, and the pain continues. I'm sure anybody who watches this video today immediately remembers what happened all these years ago and becomes fresh. It just becomes like today. But there's no denying the fact that this was a deliberate attempt, just like Auschwitz. The world didn't know. The media wasn't strong enough. There was no television. There was no social media. So people only read. And when you read through a newspaper, the impact of what happens is not as much as when you see it. And since the government in power was the one that was controlling the media in 1984, so in fact, in 1984, the only visual media available at that point was the state-owned television called the Doordarshan. Now that would only broadcast anything that the government wanted it to broadcast. So initially, the magnitude of the whole issue was not known to the world. And law and courts want evidence. By the time the magnitude got known to the world, time had passed and the evidence was lost. And the perpetrators of this crime made sure that they destroyed all the evidence. But the hurt, the damage to the psyche of these people was still as much there as, there was never, I would say, there was never a sincere effort to bomb. There was never a sincere effort to have a closure. The governments in power never ever apologized to the people who had lost their loved ones, and they were not even willing to accept. In fact, there were statements by leaders that said, when a big tree falls, the earth shakes, trying to say that since Indira Gandhi had died, so the repercussions were there to be seen for all, and they were accepted repercussions. So I think it's the government failed the people. I mean, this is the biggest blotch on democracy. Like we talk of the Holocaust for the world, we talk of the Sikh genocide as far as India is concerned. And I think probably after the violence in the 1947 partition, this was the biggest violence that this nation saw and witnessed. But unfortunately, due to the prevailing circumstances at that point of time, things did not, get known till the Sikhs from Delhi started migrating to other cities. A lot of them came to Punjab from all over the country. So that's the time when people actually started get to know. And then I think the priority at that point was to rehabilitate these people rather than, find the culprits and bring them to justice. And that's how I look at it broadly. Harpal, back to you.
I also have Mr. Ramesh Vinayak, who's joining from Chandigarh. He is the executive editor of Hindustan Times and was my outside reviewer for the exhibit. Ramesh, how do you receive?
Ramesh, you need to unmute your mic, please.
Hi, Harpal. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everybody. I am pleased to join this conversation about Harpal's project while he's at Columbia University. I and Harpal have been colleagues for last more than 30 years, and we have worked together at India Today magazine. And when Harpal first broached on this subject, about his area of research at Columbia, and my instant reaction was that this is a seminal project, because in post partition India, this remains one of the most horrific incident which kind of blotted Indian democracy, and the long-lasting impact of this incident continues. Thousands of people were killed on the streets of our national capital in broad daylight, and the wounds of this incidents are they still fester, and they haven't been closer, because there has been justice. We all know that how the cases have dragged on, and despite several commissions of inquiries which were set up by successive governments, and eventually it has been a zero-sum game. We haven't seen any real justice being done in this case, so this remains one of those black spots. And I have also very closely followed these happenings, and also spoken to so many of the victims of 1984 who had to migrate to Punjab, and their stories remain as heart-rending as they were, when these events happened. What I feel is that people have in their trauma. They have kind of lost hope for justice, but at the same time they have moved on. And time is a very slow healer in such cases where people suffer such brutalities, especially brutalities which had an implicit kind of collusion of the powers that be. So I would, comment that unless there is a semblance of justice, we can never see a closure on this case. And one can only hope that these cases are properly investigated, they are properly pursued in the courts, and we as a nation, learn lessons from this tragedy so that such things never happen in a democratic country like India. So Harpal, I really appreciate the kind of work you have done. I remember that you were in India recently, and you reached out to many victim families in Delhi, and also spoke to other stakeholders. So what you are doing is of huge significance for us, a platform where they can express themselves. So my best wishes with you, Harpal, on this project. And I'm sure Columbia, as well as we as country, would benefit from this minor work that you are doing. Thank you.
Dr. Amy, how does one deconstruct such trauma? And is there a way that we don't, I mean, as an interviewer, I don't add to, the pain of the survivors, and I'm still able to record these testimonies for the future generations?
I mean, that's a really hard question. I think a lot of the work that you're doing to try to activate these testimonies to generate solutions and visions for what justice might look like and pathways to get there, I think can make it worth telling and hearing these painful stories again. But I guess I would turn it back to you and ask you what you've been doing to take care of the narrators as you're interviewing them and to put their stories out into the world with thoughtfulness and care, because I know you've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of work around that question.
When I set out to do this project, and thanks to your guidance, when I wrote the outline and you looked at the outline, I was I had multiple goals for the project, for the thesis. Accountability, deterrence, memorialization, compensating the families somehow. So to the extent that it was possible, I have gone back to my first few narrators, and wherever I could, I have tried compensating them from my personal resources in a limited way. But going forward, I do have a plan to create a transparent kind of mechanism to not just reach out to these narrators, but also the others, particularly the widows of 1984, for them to have a life of dignity to the extent that that it is possible in the circumstances that they are in, and most of them are in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and that's all they are asking for. And they are very proud people. They don't want to accept anything from anybody. They don't want to depend on any doles. Kirpal, for example, started working. He picked up a few skills. He became a tabla teacher. He learned how to play the harmonium, and then he started teaching the others. He went to an academy as a kid, and he started doing that and generated some money for himself, for his own education, and subsequently started working in Delhi, and he supports himself, his family, as well as his mother. So they are very proud people. They would rather not eat than depend on outside support. So that sensitivity is there. So even if somebody tries to reach out to them, if they don't trust that person, they don't accept anything, and going forward, I do, since I am a part of them, in my own way, in a minor way, I will definitely, to the extent of at least the narrators for my project, I am definitely going to compensate them. I have that in mind. I started doing that, and not all of them. For example, I interviewed the press secretary to the president back then, whose car was attacked and he survived. He doesn't need resources. He's actually accessing the resources of the state of India and trying to help. So there are such people also. who are in a position to help out.
Harpal, I see some interesting follow-up questions in the chat also.
Yes, Dr. Amy, I'm looking at them now. Sarabjit Singh is asking, is there a recognized group or organization that is leading the effort for justice? And does justice come in the form of an apology, legal proceedings, financial reparations, and or anything else? And then Lisa has a question. Have any of the wives given you their reaction to the finished excerpts, interviews, other than giving their approval? I'll take Lisa's question first, and Sarabjit's question is open to all of you to engage with. Lisa, the excerpts have been played back to the narrators, and except for two, for which you don't see the interviews on the exhibit so far, because I'm still waiting for sign-offs. The others have seen the excerpts which have been chosen. Now, when you look at an entire interview and you want to play an excerpt, you look for the most powerful part, which is what I've done. But there is no distortion in this. I have ensured that the context is not lost. For example, the clip that I played, the lady is telling you a long story, and you sustained to hear it for 7.5 minutes, 8 minutes. And that is when you get the crux of what she's saying. So, of course, they are on board. Those who have still not signed off on the excerpts, I have their consent, I have their legal releases, but for the part that I've used, I'm waiting for sign-offs, which is why you don't see Tarlochan Singh's testimony and one more testimony, which is still not there. The audio and video are not there, and I will publish them once I receive them, because that's the ethical framework which we've learned. That is the ethical framework I'm going to follow. I am not in a hurry. I think there is enough there for all of us to look at, for all of us to understand what exactly happened, for all of us to engage with the survivors. As far as Sarabjit's question is concerned, is there a recognized group organization that is leading the effort for justice? Not really. There's a lawyer, Sarabjit, there's a lawyer in India, in Delhi, Mr. H.S. Fulka, who is on board as far as my project is concerned. He knows what I'm doing, and he will come in at some point to engage with me for my thesis. Other than Mr. Fulka and a handful of lawyers in Delhi courts who have not been influenced by the state or the organs of the state, in terms of giving up the cases, representing the cases in the courts before the judges. There is no real organization that is doing this. It's individual efforts. In fact, in one instance, Sarabjit, I spoke to a narrator called Tarlok Singh. His testimony is still not published because it is still being processed. He told me that his brother and another family member who worked for the Indian Army, they were killed near the airport in Delhi, in Mahipalpur. And he comes from a farming family near Jalandhar. And he said for more than 30 years, he every 6 weeks, he boarded the bus, came to Delhi to appear before various courts, and nobody would even give him space in a Sikh temple to spend the night. So he had to go to a friend's place, sometimes live at a platform or at a bus terminus and spend the night, because I think Jalandhar is at least 200 miles away from Delhi. So it's a long, road journey up and down. And he has done that, and he's been able to secure conviction for the murder of his brother and another family member. and he secured one life term and one death by hanging. And both of them are now under appeal in the Delhi High Court. So no, there is no organized, attempt to secure justice. It's Mr. Fulka, H.S. Fulka has basically done all this pro bono. He's not charged anybody anything, and used his own resources. Who also was attacked, incidentally. His house was also burnt in South Delhi. So the diaspora, there's another question from Sarabjit. Have we, as a diaspora, Indian diaspora, not done enough? It feels like we have not. Nobody's apparently attempted to organize help for the widows, for example. There has to be an organized effort. There has to be a transparent effort. You should be able to trust, suppose you want to contribute, you should be able to trust the person you're giving your money to. And you should be assured that the money that you're paying is actually reaching, the widows or the victims. So that unfortunately hasn't happened to the extent that it should have. Individually, people have done individually here and there. Somebody, so somebody's done some stuff. I have another question here from Shantanu Chatterjee, who's a program editor at Al Jazeera and my old colleague from India and a wonderful friend. He's asking how important is political will for justice for the victims of the 1984 Sikh massacre. I would not comment on it. I think it requires being distant, being away from this. So, Dr. Amy, can you come to my rescue?
I feel like probably others here know more about this than I do, honestly, but it does seem like, I think it's a really interesting question of what justice looks like. Whether how important apologies are, or whether reparations are also as important or more important, whether this needs to be a legal process or more of a restorative justice process, whether this needs to be based on connections between people who've caused harm and people who've been harmed, or can be sort of more abstracted. And so I think for each of those, there's a different kind of will required. It does seem clear from what everyone's been saying that there is a lack of political will, and that there's organizing happening, but it's not translating into maybe power at the level that's needed to make this a national issue that could be addressed. But I'm very curious to hear what others think.
Harpal, if I can jump in, this is Carlin. I was so struck by what you said about, in an answer earlier, about not being in a rush to do this work. And I think that that posture and that strength is so important here, and so connected to the complexity that Amy was just kind of speaking to, and that folks are raising, that you're balancing like the intensity of the pain and the outrage at this atrocity, like both things that, like, outrage and pain are emotions that so often like happen on like a really fast time frame, or like we think of them as sort of being faster emotions, or things that we want to address like right away, like the sort of sense of urgency, and you're managing, I think, in this project and in your work, and all of your narrators as well, to balance that with sort of holding the complexity of the solution taking much more time to come up with and to discover and to create and imagine than the initial atrocity took, right? That like this was an initial pain of 3 to 4 days, and finding a way to balance like the intensity of that and the fast pace of that with the very, very slow pace of justice in a lot of cases. And I'm just like really struck by, how you describe that and how you're kind of, holding yourself to that and also giving yourself time for that, like allowing yourself not to be in a rush here, and allowing yourself to kind of take the time to listen and to really process and think about sort of all of these complex questions.
Thank you, Carlene. Holly Werner has made an observation and asked a question. She says, I'm wondering what Indians, especially Hindus, but also Muslims, learn today about the 1984 genocide, if anything. Unfortunately, Holly, I don't have interesting, I don't have something positive to report. I'll tell you, when I was in Delhi and I'd had a conversation with Dr. Amy, and I was preparing my application and writing my own account of being in the Ludlow Castle refugee camp in 1984. I was in Delhi in the month of Feb 2020, last year. And there was that sense of deja vu when similar violence broke out against the Muslims in East Delhi, which has left some 50, 60 people dead. And the state, in a similar way, is dragging its feet in punishing the perpetrators of that violence. So I couldn't help but think at that time that if the state had come down against this method of medieval tribal justice back in 1984 and had punished anybody who had like violated somebody's space or life, lessons would have been learned and mechanisms would be in place for it to not repeat itself. But unfortunately, this same cycle has got repeated. So answer is no. I don't think lessons have been learned or systems have been put in place to prevent such occurrences. I think we are 1 minute over than the scheduled time. If you would like to make an observation over the next 2 minutes, 3 minutes, please raise your hand or unmute yourself. And then I think everybody has a schedule. So I would like to respect their time and then close the discussion. Naveen, yes.
I would like to just, tell our friends from the US who don't know much about the Sikhs. The Sikhs are a very brave community. And one of the strongest strengths of a Sikh is they like to move on. The strength of courage is very strong. It's not that they're not hurt, but they don't want to cling on to the past. If you read Sikh history and if you see how the Sikhs braved the Mughal invasions, the psyche of a Sikh is move on, let me enjoy myself, let me rebuild my life rather than, sit back thinking of taking revenge. They're very positive thinking, brave people. And secondly, Sikhs are only 2% of Indian population. So they don't really make an important vote bank. Even the state of Punjab, which has the concentration of Sikhs, has very few, only 13 seats in the parliament. So politically, it doesn't really, matter to any political party to woo the Sikhs. And Sikhs, on the other hand, don't give a damn about anything. They want to move on. But the fact remains that it's not that they're not hurt. They definitely are hurt. And they would have appreciated if somebody would have, offered some condolence and, some closure, provided some closure. So that I thought I would share with the friends from America.
Thank you, everybody. I am grateful that you made the time to come. I have another event on Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern time, where we are essentially asking a question to the world. Can we really gloss over this genocide? It'll be 2:30 a.m. in India, so I'm not expecting friends in India to join in, but definitely it's a different discussion, hopefully. So if you can make the time, I would really appreciate it. And I'm grateful that you come in today. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Harpal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harpal. It was
Thank you,
nice meeting
Harpal.
all of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harpal and narrators, for being here.
Thank you so much and bye.
Thank you, Harpal. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Harpal. And I'm sure your seminal work will revive interest in what happened in 1984, and there will be some movement for justice. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, Shantanu. Grateful. Thank you, Kirpal. Thank you, Kirpal. Apna dhyan rakhna. And I'll
ठीक है जी।
connect with you once again.
मनु नेक्स्ट वास्ते मनु दाद देना।
Thank you, Harpal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yashpal. Appreciate you joining in. Bye-bye. Thank you, Virji.
Thank you, Harpal. I'm always with you, always joining you.
Thank you.
Bye.